All right, we will get started then. Thank you, everyone, again, so much for joining. As we open today, again, please feel free to put in the chat your name, your organization, and where you're coming in from. So today's conversation is designed specifically for community school leaders who may be wondering, what exactly is competency-based education? How does it connect to the work we're already doing? And what are realistic first steps schools who are interested in could begin exploring? Our hope is that you'll leave with practical ideas and examples from schools that are actively navigating this journey. Before we dive into our today's topic, I want to briefly share the lenses through which we approach this work at full scale. Our work at full scale is anchored in a simple North Star. Every young person deserves learning that is personalized to who they are, competency-based in how they progress, and whole self-developing in the ways they grow. We believe learning should be relevant, rigorous, and relational, giving young people voice, choice, and meaningful opportunities to apply what they know in authentic contexts throughout their learning community. Making that vision a reality for every learner requires coherence across four interconnected domains: practice, what learners experience; people, the educators and community partners who make learning possible; policy, the structures that enable transformation; and progress, how we measure and use evidence of learning. Lasting transformation happens when these four domains work together.
So, one place that we've had the opportunity to see some of this coherence across the four Ps come to life is in our community-driven schools project, which is why we are all gathered here today. Over the past couple years, we've had the opportunity to work alongside four amazing, diverse school communities to explore this question: what happens when community schools intentionally apply principles from competency-based education to better serve their students? What we have found in these 2 years is that community schools and competency-based education aren't just compatible, they're actually deeply complementary. Community schools create many of the conditions that then allow competency-based practices to flourish. And CBE, or competency-based education, can provide a framework for deepening and strengthening the meaningful community schools work and help bring it into the classroom. So that is the story that we're going to be exploring today through the experience of our four panelists who represent the four school sites that we had the opportunity to study. If you'd like to learn more about the project, I believe Daniela is putting the link in the chat. You can visit our website to read detailed case studies on each of our four school sites, as well as our final report that we just published. So here's what we're going to do together today. We'll start with just a brief overview of both competency-based education and community schools frameworks in case there's unfamiliar folks in the audience or you have questions about sort of the framing we're taking to this work. And then we'll get to the important part, which is hearing from the leaders of these four schools to hear how they approach this work in their own contexts, where they started, what they've learned, and what advice they would offer to others who are here. We will reserve the last 10 minutes for your questions, but if you have questions, you are welcome to put them in the chat at any time during the presentation.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So before we get to hear from our amazing panelists, we want to just take a moment and learn together a little bit to make sure we have a common understanding of what competency-based education and community schools, what they really are. So if you could take a moment and just put in the chat where you are in your competency-based journey. One, this is the first time you're like, what is this thing called CBE? Two, you've heard it, but you're not quite sure what it means. Three, you have a working understanding. And four, you are actively using or implementing CBE. And if you could just drop your number in the chat. All right, so we see some fours and threes coming in. Oh, we've got some CBE experts here. April, I love the use of the 0.5. Please feel free to add as many decimals as needed. All right, great. So it seems like we have a healthy mix of folks who are learning about CBE for the who seems like most people have heard of it at least, and some who are experts here. So we won't spend a ton of time on this, but the essentially what competency-based education is, it's a comprehensive approach to teaching and learning built around 7 principles. At its core, CBE says students should progress when they demonstrate they've truly learned something, not simply because they spent enough time in a classroom. It also recognizes that learning should be personalized to students' strengths, needs, interests, and goals. So, with that, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Kelly to give us just a brief reminder of what the community school practices are.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to ask you to do that same poll. So it seems like we've got a lot of people familiar with CBE. How familiar are you with community schools practices? Again, on a 1 to 4 scale, 1 being, I don't know, it just sounded interesting, 4 being, I'm a deep implementer. What is our audience? Where's our audience at with the community schools framework? Okay.
Mm.
All right. 1s, 2s, and 3s. I'm not seeing as many 4s. Okay, so we've got an audience, it seems like that's more familiar with CBE and a little less familiar with community schools, which is wonderful. I'm so glad to have you all here today. Um, so let me briefly introduce sort of the guiding framework, which I should also say is not ours. This came from the Community Schools Forward collaboration back in 2023. But community schools are essentially about creating the conditions for every kid to thrive by bringing together not just educators and school leaders who work in the building, but also families and community partners as genuine collaborators in creating conditions for excellent student learning and healthy development. So this has 6 key practices that might sound really familiar if you're also familiar with the CBE 7 practices. These are rigorous, community-connected instruction, collaborative leadership, expanded learning opportunities, meaning learning that happens outside of school walls and outside of the school day, powerful student and family engagement and sharing of power, a culture of belonging, safety, and care for all students, and lastly, integrated systems of support that wrap around every kid to make sure that they have their needs met and are able to show up fully for their learning. Now, one of our biggest findings from this project, we started this project by looking at these 2 models and saying, like, they seem like they've got a lot in common. How might they overlap? And sure enough, that's what we found. They share a lot of fundamental commitments. So both CBE and community schools prioritize expanding the learning environment and say, we know that kids learn beyond a traditional classroom. What if we made space for that to happen in authentic and frequent ways so that kids could bring learning from all parts of their lives into the school day and vice versa? Secondly, learner authenticity and whole child development. We know that both of these models are grounded in a commitment to equity and to recognizing kids as holistic, community embedded humans. And both of these school models really center learners as whole people and commit to making sure that they feel seen and safe and known. Third is personalization of learning experiences. So in both of these school models, students are not just given a sort of cookie cutter standardized experience, but rather teachers and community members know who they are and adapt and tailor things for their interests. Fourth, a decentralization of power, sharing power. So it's not schools imposing things on a community of learners, nor is it the community imposing things on the school, but rather these communities are working in partnership to serve every kid. And lastly, a foundational commitment to really meeting learners' needs holistically, which might look like providing additional resources. Typically, community schools have like food pantries or clothing drives or bring medical services into the school or perhaps provide before and after care. Our panelists are going to share some of the ways in which they embody this, but it's a willingness to say if we want to care for every kid, educate every kid, we need to make sure every kid has everything they need to show up fully at school. So because these 2 models have so much in common, they don't need to think about competency-based education as one more thing. Rather, CBE provides a framework for making existing community school efforts more intentional, more coherent, and more equitable. So our guiding question today is rather than asking like, how do we become a competency-based school? We're saying, what happens when community schools use competency-based practices to deepen the work that they're already doing? That's what our panelists have been exploring over the last few years, and we're really excited to shift the attention now to them so they can share about their journeys.
Thank you, Kelly. We are so thrilled to be joined today by the school leaders from each of our four school sites: Dr. Hector Giron, Jean Berthium, Kristen Eng, and Derek DeStefano. I'll now turn it over to each of them to tell us a little bit more about their schools. And if you would, panelists, one sentence describing where you are in your competency based journey. And we'll start with Hector.
Good morning or good afternoon, actually, or wherever you are. Welcome. My name is Hector Giron. I'm the head administrator of a charter school in Las Cruces named Raíces del Saber Chinachli Community School. This is our graduate profile that you're viewing. And even though school has been in existence for 7 years, it has only been able to focus on living its mission and vision over the past 2 years. Raíces has made tremendous headway in providing the education we envision for the students since the change in administration happened. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jean Berthium, and I am one of the co-principals of Winooski Middle and High School here in Vermont. And I would say that, we are on this journey, and we've been on this journey for about 10 years. And most recently, we're breaking some ground around our flexible pathway experiences and capitalizing on the community partners that we've had at our school and using those to really develop new learning opportunities for students and not be constrained by Carnegie units and seat time.
Thank you, Jean. Kristen?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kristen Eng. I am the proud principal at CICS West Belton, and we are located in Chicago in the Belmont-Cragen area. We are our CBE journey. We have been a community hub for the Belmont-Cragen area for over 25 years, but really like living out our mission and vision for the last few years. And, we are now really wanting to strengthen and amplify our student and family voices.
Thank you, Kristen. And last but certainly not least, Derek.
Good morning. My name is Derek DeStefano. I'm lucky enough to be the principal at Morgan Elementary School in Rowan County, North Carolina. It is a small rural school in North Carolina. We have only about 300 students. I've been here for 14 years, and we've been on our competency-based journey for the last 5. We're finally coming out of the implementation dip and starting to see some of those results that we would expect to see when we implemented competency-based. We were lucky enough to show over a 10% growth in each of our subject areas this year. So that was huge for us as we were really trying to prove the effectiveness of the model.
That's amazing, Derek. Thank you so much. So now that we know a little bit more about each of you, I'd love to ask, so community schools are already doing so much to support the whole child. What prompted your school to begin exploring competency-based education, and what made it feel like the right next step?
I'll
We
start
start with
off.
you, Derek. I was going to say, let's start with
Yeah.
Derek. Go ahead.
So for us, we had done a lot of work around the community schools framework, and we had really built relationship with our community. We felt that was strong, but we still felt like we were missing the personalized learning part. That was a part of always our mission and our vision. We said we were personalizing learning, but felt like when we really analyzed, we were missing the boat. So we were lucky enough to be granted our district earned renewal school status, which allowed us to operate with charter-like flexibilities. So from there, we began to look at competency-based, which then also answered another one of my issues with traditional education, and that is grading. So really, we began that journey towards competency-based for the twofold piece. One, to address the issues with traditional grading, and two, to really look at personalized learning as a part of our community-based school.
Megan, I could
Thanks,
just
Derek. Please.
so I would just say ours, Winooski is a suburb of Burlington, our largest city, if people call it a city. It's fairly small for Vermont standards and by comparison to elsewhere. But we have been the port of entry for many new Americans. And so for over 10 years, we're a resettlement community. We are actually the state's only global majority school. So we are serving a plethora of folks from all over the world, and our traditional system didn't serve those students well. So we are really thinking about what these Carnegie units really were losing. Some of our because of poverty, because of when students were moving into our school, our traditional graduation requirements became this barrier. And so we were really thinking about how students start leading and not just entering the world. We wanted systems that ask students not to just pass through our doors, but how they can trailblaze, how they can form community and learn within the context of their community and align those with clear national standards.
Thank you, Jean. And Kristen and Hector, as you were responding as well, I think it's interesting. Derek and Jean are both principals of district schools, and you and Hector are both administrators of charter schools. So I'm curious how that may, did it allow you more freedom, or does it sound like, the experiences of district folks, they were able to do it as well?
I mean, I'll jump in. So I think for me, so we are Chicago Public School charter school. So while we are under the umbrella of Chicago Public Schools for our like renewal, we do have a little bit of flexibility in how in which we personalize our experiences for our students through our scheduling, through assessments. I think one of the things for us is we're managed by distinctive schools, and I think as distinctive schools, we have 8 schools within the city of Chicago, and for us, it really started with when students came back from COVID, and we are really trying to develop the whole child holistically, and it's not just academically. We really wanted to think about like their mental and social emotional health. And so our community hub model started right after that. And we have we've actually built a system and built a hub where I have a full-time community schools coordinator who is amazing, and he brings in partnerships for our families, for our students before and after, really hones in on like what the students' needs are, and then is now being amplified to really help us in strengthening our student and family voice. So we have a learner advisory model happening right now at our school. We have a family advisory happening at our school right now. So our main goal is really to amplify and strengthen those the voices and stakeholders at our school so that we can continue to thrive as a bigger community.
Well, it's interesting because of the fact that there is the whole reason of becoming a charter school is to claim that difference, that freedom, that opportunity to do something different. And so in the chartering process, you go about establishing that different focus and vision and mission, right? And so this actually, the story to this school actually dates back to one of the founders of the school, one of the people that actually began the Chinachli pedagogy that we integrate into our school, Mr. Aceves. He tells that when he was a 16-year-old student going through high school, he could not understand what was going on in school. He did not appreciate it. It really wasn't working for him. And so he envisioned a school, something different, wasn't firm, wasn't sure what he wanted to do. And so over time, as he grew and explored and got his education, he began to work with other people that helped him develop this worldview, this view of education and how it could be transformative. And so when he retired back around 2016, he and his wife decided they wanted to open a charter school. And so they started the process, and it was a long, hard-fought process of about 3 years before they were able to get chartered. It is a state charter school. We're accountable for all the curriculum that is mandated by the state of New Mexico. but we're trying to take a very different approach. The school is rooted in the histories, teachings, and the lands of the people who have lived in this region historically. And before the colonization took place, this place was sustained by communities whose lives were shaped by land knowledge, by sky knowledge, traditions, and the teachings that were carried through family and community. Okay, learning was grounded in relationships with each other. And so Raíces set out to establish a community school that was experiential. It has all the components of a community school. And this was an idea before even community schools were really a strong process in the state of New Mexico. It talks about it being experiential, participatory. We really focus on the bilingualism in the area because of the history of affiliation with Mexico. And there's so many people here that need to reclaim that for themselves. It's child-centered and it's very culturally responsive, not only to the Hispanic culture, but also to the native cultures that inhabited this area before we came along. Yeah. So that's what led to the community coming together and deciding as a community to establish a school. It was presented and shared with people. One of the founders is a community organizer, and so she used that knowledge to bring people from all walks of life to work on this charter, conceptualize it, and then move forward to get approval for implementation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hector,
So,
I was just going to, Hector, that comparison, Megan's question really about the public and the charter schools was really a fascinating one. And I appreciated listening to Kirsten and Hector about their experience. In Vermont, about 15 years ago, the state legislature actually legislated the value of proficiency-based teaching. Yet they didn't give any direction or advice on how to do it. So you had all these schools that were trying to implement it and just getting really messy with it. And it became a problem in terms of like our students that are transient moving from one community to another and how a transcript is actually reviewed and stuff. So we've actually done a lot of work to have a transcript that speaks for itself in the right ways. And it's clearer for other schools that are receiving some of our students if our students moved away. But like Hector was just saying, you know, we have so many different languages taught here, and we undervalue and we don't appreciate the value of these heritage languages that are spoken here. And this is a really great opportunity for us to think about the seal of biliteracy, to think about the ways in which we're empowering our families to be partners in a community that is foreign to them. It's very hard to make those inroads. So we've been forced trial by fire, if you will, here in Vermont. We have nobody in Vermont to look to for guidance. So we've tried to figure it out in a really creative way. But we didn't have the luxury of 3 years to establish that charter, as I was hearing Hector talk about too. So,
yeah, Gene, it's very similar here. We are one of 20 elementary schools in our district, and yet we're the only elementary school in our district that it runs a competency-based system. So as we began that implementation, we really had nobody in the state to look to. There's some groups in North Carolina that are doing some great work with it, but I mean, it was researching through the Aurora Institute. It was traveling halfway across the country to look at, other systems doing it, but there's nobody else where we are doing that work. So we ran into some of those very similar things, but also being a part of what would be considered a very traditional community in rural North Carolina. So making some changes like that led to some other challenges as well, but it definitely it was a part of that journey.
So I'd love to build on those.
No, sorry, go ahead.
No, please. Well, let me ask the question and then maybe you can get us started, Hector. Is one of the, many of you are pioneers of this model, right? Like you are figuring out what it looks like to do competency-based and community schools practices in your local context with all of the unique local needs you have. So where did you start? Like what were some of the first concrete competency-based practices you introduced? And how did your existing relationship with this community help make those first steps possible?
I could give a stab. I would just say that I think it started with separating compliance of work ethic with academic proficiencies and standards, because we were navigating so many cultural values in terms of like attendance, behavior, deadlines. Like these were like, this is not what we're assessing. We're not even teaching those things. So if we're not teaching them, why are we assessing? So I would say that's where we started, because we were just, these values were getting a little messy.
Yeah, see, and I would second that. Before I even knew competency-based existed, we started to work with grading reform, and really, and it was for many of the reasons Gene mentioned. And then in hindsight, realized that was really the initial movement towards competency-based, was getting the community, getting the teachers to understand what really should be a part of assessing a student and their performance. And so without that, we would have really struggled to get the community and teachers on board.
Yeah, I would say that like for West Belden, it started back in 2014 where Distinctive Schools was a partner with Leap Innovations. And so really using the Leap learning framework, because we were one of the pioneers of personalized learning and having and really using the Leap learning framework as a framework of how we want our student learning experiences to be. And so that was choice menus, that was personalized pathways, that was flexible learning environments, that was multitude of what students showing and demonstrating their work and like collaborative spaces, not only for the students, but also for the teachers. And I think that's what really jump-started that instructional piece of it to really then take a step back as the Distinctive Schools Network to like really full picture what does like a community school look like and bringing in those practices and that it goes with that Leap learning framework of the learner connected of how does school operate outside of the four walls of school.
It's interesting because the history of the school actually goes back before it ever came into existence. I worked as a principal in Texas, Canutillo, Texas, outside of El Paso, Texas, as a school of 850 children situated in a very low-income community. And Mr. Aceves was a teacher when I was hired there. And after a year and a half, I became principal of the school. And one day I found out that this teacher was doing some strange stuff in a first grade bilingual classroom. And so there was people were kind of murmuring, talking about basically doing the right kind of thing. And so I thought, well, I need to figure out what's going on. So I asked to meet with him and he came to my office and I sat down with him, talk to me. What's going on in your classroom? What are you doing? There's this nattering going on that maybe you're doing some really strange stuff. So he sat down and led me through the grounding of what he was teaching, the Chinachli pedagogy, the idea of this community-based process and this focus on children, this not being a Mr. Ditto, not honing in on the state mandated process, but honing on really, really high quality education and ensuring that the children understood what was going on. So he and I have had a conversation about that encounter years after the fact. And he said that when he walked in there, he thought I was going to shut him down. I thought I was going to tell him, stop, don't do that anymore. But I turned around and I said, okay. I said, I like what I'm hearing. I said, what kind of help do you need from me? How can I help you? And so that is what permitted him to begin actually implementing this pedagogy and these ideas in the public school setting over 20 years ago. And so we worked together I was principal of a building for 10 and a half years. And during that time frame, we worked together and grew the program. So it became a very impactful program. And the interesting thing about it was that I never did ask central office for permission to do this. I said, this is a good idea. It really brings the community in. It really does all these things that we know we need to do to bring schools together and have them be successful and support the children, right? Support the students. And so by the time a lot of the people in the community figured out what was going on, the central office came around. It was already doing so well that they decided to leave us alone and, until and so that's the seed of the process that was then came about when he retired. Mr. Aceves retired in Texas in education. He came to Las Cruces and he and his wife decided to try to begin the school. Now, I mentioned the 3-year process. It was a huge struggle because there was tremendous opposition to bringing the school into play that took into account the history of the area and try to build on that and try to bring really productive, positive experiences to students that were also grounded on indigenous culture and knowledge. And so it's been in essence when I'm telling you that it started back 16 when this man was 16 years old. He's grown and lived that all his adult life, and that's what led him to work with the community to establish the school and to work with all the founders that brought the school into existence.
Yeah, thank you. I think before we move to our next question, which will build on some of these challenges that each of you have sort of nodded to, I just want to name something I heard, which is like y'all started in very different places. Like Jean and Derek, you said you started essentially from like grading and assessment reform work. Kristen, your school started from personalized instructional moves and then kind of said, okay, now what does it look like to bring the community better into our school? And Hector, you said, I had a teacher doing some strange stuff. Like, and sometimes that is what it takes is like one forward thinking, creative mover who helps to cast a vision for a way we could do school differently. And I think that's really beautiful because in the end, y'all ended up deep in these like complementary frameworks that are based on all these research-backed best practices, whatever, but it doesn't have to start with something that big and scary. It can start with this one initiative. It can start with one teacher. It can start with one good idea. So I just wanted to put a pin on that. And then anyone who wants to share, you can share on that, or I know Megan has another question about some of the challenges you've experienced along the way.
Kelly, I just would add that I thank you for that summary. And I would just think about utilizing established community school milestones, such as student-led conferences or exhibitions of learning, as an opportunity as a testing ground for performance-based assessments, proving that student voice really matters and their presentation skills are these transferable skills that we value.
Yeah, thank you.
Building on that a little bit, our fifth grade does a capstone presentation that they work on all year long that involves a family, and it ends at the end of the year when we visit our local universities, New Mexico State University, and the students use a presentation room there to present their capstone project. It's called the Caracol, and so we are working this next year to begin to expand components of the Caracol so that every grade level throughout their 6 years, their K-5 experience here in school, are developing the skills and the ability and expanding on that, and also growing the project one component at a time until they get to fifth grade when they have this great file of resources, materials that they'll use for these presentations. And so we're growing that this next year.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So, Kelly and I have the luxury of having gotten to know each of you so well in your school communities and your journeys. And we've heard about so many great successes. We've also heard about challenges that you have faced or are facing. Derek, you shared with me about a community that goes generations and generations and generations back that said, if it was good enough for me, why isn't it good enough for my kids? Hector, you spoke about how it was only really in the last 2 years that you've been able to actualize this vision for your school in a coherent and consistent way. Kristen, you have students and families who are fearful for their safety in this country, and even walking to school is a challenge. And Jean, you have what, over 30 languages spoken at your school, which is approximately 30 more languages, or like 29 more languages spoken than in any other Vermont school. And yet you're all here, you're all doing it. So you must have learned lessons along the way, not just to, I don't want to say overcome these challenges, but to learn from them, to embrace them and do it. What lessons have you learned to actually make competency-based education come alive in your communities?
I'll jump right in. So I think one of the biggest lessons for me is when distinctive schools brought in what should our community hub model looks like. Our schools come from vastly different communities, and mine is primarily Hispanic, Latinx. And so for me, the biggest lesson is really asking myself and my team, like, what do our families truly need? And you brought it up, Megan, of like my families were very fearful of, this past school year of what was happening in Chicago. And so for me, the biggest bet has been our community schools coordinator. And it has like really tremendously paid off in the last 3 years when we really came to fruition our community hub model. And he directly works with families on the student needs, on the before and after school care, any mental health resources. He really is their person and has really amplified their voices to advocate for themselves and to say, this is what I really need in my child's school. This is what I really want in the community for my child and what to come out of it. And I think that has really been the biggest payoff for me. And because of that, we've been able to get the school out of the lowest reporting system in Illinois State Board of Education to now really thriving and being in the green rather than in the red. And we're making incremental growth year after year after year on our academics, because our students and families now have a buy-in of what our mission and vision is for our community.
I would say that there are many lessons that we have learned, and so we're probably not going to talk about all of them. But one that I think, two that come to mind really quickly for me is teachers cannot build a CPE culture in isolation, and it requires a physical and symbolic space where general educators, special educators, multilingual educators, and community partners can actually co-plan and design learning experiences together that have an end in mind, and then they're planning backwards for students to be able to do things by themselves, not with any scaffolding anymore, but what does that look like? And so this year we're creating a new space that is off of our hub, we call, in the central part of our school, and it allows for the design of curriculum and pulling away the vulnerabilities of teaching and learning, so that there is a collaborative process in which we're engaging in real clear outcomes together. And that really breeds to excellence, breeds opportunity. And so when we have that in place, that shifts the mindset that the hardest part isn't rewriting rubrics, it's using the rubrics. And it's the deeply ingrained adult, family, employer mindsets around traditional grades. And so we really focus on the acquisition of skills, knowledge, and dispositions that we can actually show and students can speak about and demonstrate in a variety of ways.
I wanted to share this lessons learned is more on a personal level that allows me to work in this kind of environment more so than lessons learned in focusing on the school itself.
That's
So
great.
the one thing that really has inspired me is the level of community effort that can be generated when people are brought together and unified. Okay.
Mm,
The second thing that I've learned is that you've got to keep your mind completely clear and open. You have to work at it. It's an overwhelming process, but borrowing from the Buddhist concept of the unstained mind and open awareness, that is to seek to have a mind that is so completely clear and unconditionally open to all experiences, that we stay open on all sides. And I participated in a Buddhist training years and years ago where this seed was planted. And it's something that I've worked on since then. And then to me, that connects to Covey's Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And Steve, you just talked about starting with the end in mind, which is one of the key practices, right, in the Seven Habits. And I think that one of the things that really provides schools like ours an opportunity to succeed is the fact that there are core values there. There are the core values that if all of us sat down and talked, I would believe that we would find that our core values are almost, they're worded differently, but they reflect the same kind of things. And so when you drive something based on principle and core values and you have an end in mind, that provides that clarity, that focus, that ability to filter out things that could take, that sounds great, but could take you in a totally different direction. And so you have to really evaluate all these things through this filter. And even though they're a great idea, you've got to be able to pass them by because they're not really taking you to where you envision being. So I believe that the clarity, the focus, the purpose, the intent, and what we call our vision and mission is really what drives the success of the school. Okay.
Beautiful.
There's
Thank you.
there's also the idea of the growth mindset, really being able to develop and have a growth mindset. The idea that we are able to change and grow and produce if we rise to the challenges and look for solutions and don't look at things as problems, rather look at them as challenges, opportunities for new learning, for an opportunity to find a different type of solution. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think for us one of the biggest lessons was, and was during that community when we were working on the community schools was really building trust in our community. We really started to bring them into what we were doing. Had we tried to implement a competency-based model without that trust, I probably would have been driven to the outskirts of town and dropped off. So that was pretty radical where I am. So we worked really hard to just build that trust in the community that we were here for them, that we became that base, that community hub. So that was a big part of that transition. And then as we transitioned, one of the biggest lessons that we learned was the importance of, as it is really in traditional education, but having that continuous improvement model well developed in your school. So each
Mm.
summer here, some of the biggest gains have come from we have our community members and our teachers get together and they identify what was one of our biggest flaws for the year. And then our teachers, I pay them for a month each summer to come back and address that flaw. So whatever we vote on was the biggest need, they come back for a month in the summer and address that need, whether it was redeveloping assessments and creating curriculum. And what that does is not just create community buy-in, but buy-in from the staff that is ultimately in charge of the implementation. They've created all the resources we have. They've used others, but so it's been twofold in that buy-in from the community as well as, staff.
I will also say, again, from a place of privilege, having gotten to know each of you and each of your sites, something that I found in common is that all of your teachers have, to Hector's point, they all have the growth mindset. You've clearly really invested in your people. Across all of the sites, it's very evident that you have taken the time to really foster the skills and the mindsets that you need to work in a competency-based place. And that for those who, if was a change, for those who couldn't get behind it, I know I've heard your stories that sometimes there are hard decisions that you have to make to really invest in the people who want to be there and want to do this work, and how to grow that talent from within as well. Kelly, do you want to take our final question before we take some
Yeah.
from the audience?
Yeah, we have a bunch of good questions coming in from the audience, so I want to make sure we save time for that. But before we get there, please drop more questions if you have them for the panel. Briefly, I'd love to whip around and have each of you share sort of very, one or two sentences If you were giving advice to somebody who wanted to start on this journey this fall, where should they start? What is like one baby step, one first move that might be impactful?
I guess for me, set a vision and go from there. I think starting small by just setting up the conditions, whether that's like the learning environment or the culture at school. I think that's going to be really important. But your vision is the vision of what you want your community school to be is going to be really important.
I'd like to build on that a little bit. I addressed mine from even before you get to that point, make sure you believe in it. Uh, this is more than just implementing a new reading program. You're not bringing a different set of tools to your teachers. So and it's tough. You go through some pieces that are really hard. So making sure that you fully own it before that journey, because if not, as people begin to question what you're doing, look at what you're doing, it you have to have a full belief in that. So make sure that you do the research, that you wrap your mind around it of what you want it to look like, so that as you're creating that vision with your staff, it's there and you fully support it.
If I could be a little, my advice would be to start with habits of work. Don't try to change your entire transcript overnight. This fall, maybe simply start by separating behavioral expectations with academic grades. It completely changes the classroom conversation between teachers, students, and parents. Um, and so we're not seeing that the behavior is the focus and the obstacle. We're actually focusing on what kids are learning. And I would just say that look at what it already exists as part of, maybe do a little mapping of your school in terms of where are you as a community-based school, right? Like, do you have internships? Do you have community service? Do you have extended learning opportunities? Don't reinvent the wheel. Try to figure out how these can be not marginalized experiences, but actually something that where it could be associated with standards and performance indicators.
I'll go back and revisit what I've said before. The idea of starting with a clear end in mind. What is it your intent is? What is your vision and mission? And it's already been stated here. And then, Derek, you stated that you have to believe in this. Otherwise, it's not going to work. If there's any doubt in your mind that what you're doing is taking you in the right direction, then you need to stop and rethink things before you start moving forward. That clarity of intent, the clarity of purpose is essential for the success of a school that is going to implement a transformative process. And the other thing is staying open on all sides, so that as you encounter experiences, you encounter challenges, you're being able to look for solutions in community. And in community means involving the parents, involving the professionals, and to the degree possible, the children based on their level of maturity. They've got to be part of that process.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We have some awesome questions from our audience that I hope we have time to answer a few. The first question is, how long does this process take? I imagine there is a transition that takes years to complete. So how long has this taken for each of you to move from, maybe, it sounds like you all started as strong community schools, or you built your way towards being stronger community schools. But how long did the transition then take to becoming a competency-based school?
I don't know if it's years, but I think it's always ongoing for us. I think that we started, is it fully to fruition of where I think we're really thriving and being and say that like we are a CBE school? Absolutely not. I think because of the climate that we're in and education is always ever changing, we are always changing what we believe is what's best for our students. And so it's been a journey for a long time, and I think it continues to be that journey for us. So I can't say how many years, but I know for me and Distinctive Schools and CICS West Belden, it has been over 10 years of moving from like personalized learning to then like really wrapping around our services and our hands around all of our students and families.
Yeah, see, and you're right. It's hard to put a time frame on that. We spent 2 years working on grading reform, then a year transition into standards based before making that jump to competency based, and then from there, like you said, I don't even after 5 or 6 years, I don't think we're there. I don't know that we'll ever get fully there. But I always tell everybody that even in year one, even with the mistakes we made, and which were many, I still felt like we were doing better than what traditional schools were doing, that were doing it at their best. And so, but that was how much I really supported, where we were going. I wouldn't, and I still would say that.
You
Derek,
know,
just to put you on the spot, did did you have just one planning year? There was a planning year, right?
We did. We were actually going to make the jump during COVID, and then COVID hit. So that slowed us down a little bit. That allowed us to actually look at. We went standards based because I had imagined that COVID started and that my teachers were going to want to stop the ball from rolling and that they would, learn how to teach online and do those things. And they voted that they wanted to continue to look at competency based even under those circumstances. So I got them to agree to at least stop and do 1 year of standards based to where we could at least get the framework established. And that was probably smart, but like I said, so we had that one planning year to develop the frameworks for what we did.
what we're talking about is trying to bring about systems change. And there's some work done with systems change research that says it's really dependent on the organization and how prepared that organization is to begin implementing changes. And so if there's a unity and there's a focus around that change process could take 3 to 4 years. If it's an organization that is disjointed, is really not all there to begin with, and it's a process that's being built, it can take up to 7 years or more, longer. So really, the changes that you would like to bring about, there's ways you can bring about those changes and maybe accelerate them by ensuring that the people that you're working with are prepared to make those changes. I think that people that work in organizations are fearful of change. It's one of the things that really creates that barrier to move forward. So part of the work that has to be done is ensuring that the people are prepared to make the changes that they're being asked to make, that they understand the wheres and why fors of that, and ensuring that there's always continual support to back them up whenever they run into challenges that scare them, the challenges that scare them, the changes that scare them, being able to back that up and having a grounding for the change, not just because you think it's good, it's because we all understand that it is a good thing to do. So it really becomes a never-ending process. This is where the idea of always coming back and revisiting and working together as a community to improve, because there will always be room to do something better in the work that we do.
I would just respond to, and I'm not going to speak for the other panelists, but I believe I probably can take a stab to say that this is a journey, and I think it's something that is our North Stars, and that it drives us. And I think one of the things I would say is that you got to keep equity as the anchor, because I would make an argument that CBE is fundamentally an equity initiative. And that when we are thinking that way, we are challenging the systems and the mechanisms in which teaching and learning happens, that is aligned and centered around students and not adults. Too often, just keep in mind that our system, our school system, our traditional system has been around and well established for many, many years. And what we're trying to do really isn't that innovative. It's actually in the mindset of some of our indigenous ancestors that are deep in community, that none of us are as smart as all of us, and that we will grow. And when we position youth juxtaposed to their community and The systems within our community, they get to discover themselves much quicker and sooner. And we're not waiting or playing the banking game of education. We're actually engaging them in their education and their own self-identity.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kelly.
Well, there's so many good questions. I'm having trouble choosing, but I think what I would like to ask is part of a multi-part question that just was submitted. And this participant asked about your learning and the ways in which it's cross-curricular or maybe expands the school walls or expands outside of school walls. So could we briefly just share, like, are there ways in which learning is cross-curricular, across disciplines, across grade levels, or maybe, expands into the community? And what does that look like in practice?
In 1 minute or less each.
Yeah, quick.
I'd like to take that question on. It's the idea of community connected projects, outdoor classroom. We have a garden at the school that the students work and they go and participate. They have a structure that works for them. They cook in the horno that is built outside for them and test the food that they grow. They do nature walks. The capstone project, which is really the idea of them capturing a core thing in their lives that they've experienced through the school that they want to make a presentation about. Um, and then the latest project that we're undertaking is work based on Luis Moll and Norma Gonzalez's work on funds of knowledge. The idea of that we can capture people's funds of knowledge, what they know in the entire community. We could have the community begin to participate in the education of the children based on their strengths.
I would just add that many of our flexible pathway experiences are in what we call personal learning plans. And we are able to pull from national standards that aren't just associated in one academic area, but it could be financial literacy with some literacy standards as well. And so this starts to break down the silos of learning and actually thinking about the integration of math and various standards in that work.
As an elementary school, I will admit that's definitely an area of growth for us. We are very we look at learning journeys, through a definite lens of what they should be learning in our community. But right now, I think our strength is that we involve the community coming into our school and providing those opportunities for students and teaching about things that are important to this area. But definitely looking at expanding that outside of our walls. We run into some difficulties when we're talking about 5-year-olds getting out on their own. But we're definitely an area of growth for us.
I think for us, it's the same thing as Derek's school, but also really trying to bridge that gap of making sure that our families are a resource for their own students and for all the other students. So I think that, for us, we're really trying to build those partnerships with families that have those connections to come into the schools, and then also are building collaborative learning spaces for our teachers so that like our art teacher can be with our science teacher in a science experiment or music brought into a math lesson, etc.
Well, thank you all so much. And I hate to cut anyone short. We are at time. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists for engaging in such a rich conversation. For those who are joining us today, we have a list of resources that I think Daniela is putting in the chat. And we will also follow up with in our email to learn more. Stay connected. We'd love to see you at our symposium in October, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.